Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mary Ellen Bench. I'm counsel at Dentons in the Toronto office, and thank you very much for joining us today for what will be an exciting discussion on a big topic in the Toronto area, transit-oriented development. We have a terrific panel with us today. We have Michael Lindsay, who is President and CEO of Infrastructure Ontario. We have David Yam, who is General Manager Business Development at MTR in Hong Kong. And a big appreciation to David because it's 3 o'clock in the morning in Hong Kong. So he's gotten up very early to participate with us today. And we have Josh Thomson, who is Senior VP Development at Cadillac Fairview and very much involved in transit-oriented communities, especially the East Harbour project. So thank you very much, panelists. Michael, I'm going to ask you to start for us today and just give us some introductory remarks on the TOC experience in Ontario and Infrastructure Ontario's role in particular.
Thanks very much, Mary Ellen. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that wherever you are healthy and happy and hopeful. It's a delight to be back at CCCCC. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Yeah, Mary Ellen, let me just briefly talk about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it, if I can. I'll take just a couple of minutes. So I think it's fair to say most of the people who are listening to the sound of my voice right now probably have experience in major world-leading cities around the world. And therefore, I think they will understand that massive programmatic investments in infrastructure, particularly around transit, are often used quite intentionally as a catalyst for broader social development and outcomes. And that really is what we're trying to do here. The Government of Ontario has announced really the largest ever investment in subways in the history of Canada. That's complemented, by the way, by the largest programmatic investment in commuter rail that I think has ever been done in Canada. And intentionally, what the government has charged us to do is try to make sure that as we make these investments in and around transit sites, we're creating cohesive communities. Why are we doing that? Because we know that some of the challenges that this region and this city in particular face around housing can be addressed, can be mitigated by a thoughtful program of transit-oriented communities. So what it is we're after effectively is intentional, cohesive development around transit sites that will add incredible amounts of units. Our preliminary estimates are approximately 76,000 units for 134,000 people, as well as jobs, employment uses. Our preliminary estimates are something like approximately 85,000 jobs near or at transit station along each one of the routes that the province has announced, from the Ontario line to the Yonge North Subway extension, to the Eglinton West extension, to the Scarborough extension. And simultaneously, we're trying to achieve other social benefits as well. We know that transit-oriented communities around the world have had a positive effect on reducing traffic congestion, reducing emissions, building integrated, accessible communities that benefit residents with the kinds of amenities that really, as I say, create cohesive places to live, work, and play. So that's the mission. Now, how are we doing it is the question, and I'm sure will animate much of our discussion today. So what we are doing is we are leveraging the lands that are otherwise being taken for the purposes of construction in order to do development. And there's a couple of different ways that this is happening. In certain locations where there are stations, we find that there are incumbents that are already significant landholders, and we are, in a way that will always demonstrate value for money for the taxpayer, engaging them quite directly in respect of development concepts that might achieve all of the objectives that I was just pointing at. But in the vast majority of places and spaces, what we're doing is what we call a collect and compete model, whereby we're taking lands for construction and we're ensuring right now, as these underlying transit projects are being defined, their project specifications are being set, that we're ensuring that there is enough resilience and hardening and design that anticipates overbuild being baked in to those project specifications. And here I just have to compliment the partnership that we have with our friends at Metrolinx. This is the step that many jurisdictions tend not to get right around transit-oriented development. It is not something that you can bolt on after the fact to an existing transit project. You need to make sure that station architecture is sufficiently hardened to permit it, and that's happening right now. The point being that when we collect these sites, harden them for future development, we then find ourselves in a position over the interval of the next several years in the position to be able to have competitions with interested developers about who would be the optimal development partner for us at each one of these sites. And to help guide us, what we've done as a provincial authority, and we're quite privileged at IO to be playing a leadership role in connection to this, is we've come up with a preliminary understanding of what we think appropriate development looks like at each one of the sites. I stress that this is a preliminary view. I would stress equally that we've worked with talented third parties to key off of planning considerations and existing communities. This isn't, as it were, massive amounts of incremental density at each and every station site across the entirety of the network. We think we've done a decent job of ultimately coming up with things that are complementary, but that do achieve the objectives that I was talking about at the start of my brief remarks. And now begins the process of working with municipalities and working with local communities effectively to review those development concepts and to talk to our partners in City of Toronto, Region of York, and beyond about what would constitute effectively a coherent and cohesive transit-oriented development at any one of these sites. And I stress that we are absolutely interested in the public engagement that goes with each one of these sites as well. To date, we've already announced possible transit-oriented community concepts at East Harbour, Corktown, Queen and Spadina, King and Bathurst, and Exhibition Station along the new Ontario Line subway, as well as at Bridge and High-Tech stations on the Yonge North subway extensions. And I trust that people will have seen that in parallel to the municipal review of some of those proposals that the province is advancing, public engagement has begun. We've had 8 virtual open houses to take place to inform the public, solicit feedback on those various sites. And as I say, we're regularly engaged with both our municipal partners and the community through established local advisory communities, LACs. Anybody who's interested in knowing more about what the plan looks like for public engagement can go to engageio.ca to find out more. But as a final thought, this really catalytic evolution, we think, of downtown Toronto, York Region, and other areas in the GTHA is only ever going to succeed through partnership as between transit agency, commercial agents vis-a-vis TOC, municipalities, development partners, and the local public. And I really do think it's coming together, Mary Ellen. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk to it today.
All fantastic news. Great to be part of. Thanks, David. I know your experience in Hong Kong is somewhat different. The purpose of transit-oriented development is a little different there. Can you explain that to us a bit?
Well, thank you, Mary Ellen. First of all, I feel so grateful that able to come back to the P3 conference. Unfortunately, not able to come in person, but I always enjoy, the conference, and I definitely, feel very excited to especially wake up in the middle of the night and participate in the conference. And thank you for the invitation. And in Hong Kong, we had a long journey talking about the TOC. I don't know, that maybe a lot of audiences have experience in Hong Kong, that Hong Kong is a very, very small city in Asia. And if there's no traffic, most of the time we have a very, very bad traffic. If there's no traffic from north to south and east to west, you can complete the journey within an hour. But most of the time the traffic is so bad that, you take more than an hour, if not 2 to 3 hours. So the fundamental part of the railway projects is to resolve congestion. So when we started way back in the 70s, Hong Kong is a very, very concentrated, very dense city. Okay, so we try to resolve the traffic issues, within the city by building subway. Okay, when we talk about subway, that building a subway, you need a depot for the trains to stable, okay? And in the city is not easy to find a big piece of land to make a depot, okay, for the subway. So when we able to find the first piece of land, we find that, okay, wow, this is in the middle of the city. What could that piece of land be best used, okay, better utilized, okay? And then we think of, okay, could we build something, build residential and others to just to make the land use more welcome, okay? And then, you know, the first projects that was way back in the 70s and 80s, and we're talking about building thousands of condos on top of a depot, okay? And it went in several phases apparently, because it was a tricky task when you try to build something on top of infrastructure. So we had a lot of lessons learned, you know, from that particular project, that the phasing, what we call the enabling work, that need to think through in the project outstart, were very, very crucial to the project success. And it was at that time the first project that we had, as I said, it just from the perspective of better land use, okay? And it never really come across to think of financing the rail projects, as we all know that railway projects is very, very capital intensive, okay? But leverage on that experience, and then the condo units, that thousands of them, every time we'll take it to the market, it just got sold out in days, and then we turn out to be, wow, this could be a very, very lucrative business. But we always, as a railway planner, looking from the perspective that it could finance the construction cost of the railway, okay? And then when we look at the model, you know, leverage on that experience, that okay, when we plan the next railway, then we understand that, okay, if we could have a smarter use of land, okay, and that the value that generate from the land, not just a benefit the construction costs of the railway project, but also create another layer of value that is convenient to passengers, convenient to customers, and actually is a building more like a community concept than just railway. And then we start to evolve in using that model, that wherever we plan a rail corridor, we always looking at, you know, number one, whether this model is a fit to compensate some of the construction costs, and also have a second objective, that is to depopulate the residents, you know, being too concentrate or too crowded in a particular area, whether they could you know, decentralize or depopulate to a further away community, and traveling back to their place of work and place of leisure by railway. And in Hong Kong, I think is a little bit different from Toronto, that most of the land in Hong Kong is government land. So this is different. So the government is able to, when we develop the rail alignment, okay, we all we need to do is negotiate with the government if there is the funding gap, as you know, that the ridership, the patronage, the income from the patronage will never able to cover the construction costs. Sometimes it may cover the operating costs, but definitely not the construction costs. So we were saying that we calculate what we call the funding gap, and then we discuss with the government how much land. And sometimes the government say that, okay, well, there's definitely no land available along the rail corridor, then there will be another treatment on the funding gap. But as long as we're able to find land along the corridor that we could use to develop a community or something, then we just negotiate with the government on the land premium. So we are not getting the land from the government for free. We just agreed upfront premium that once we we develop the land that the premium we will have to pay, or we and the developer would have to jointly pay to the government before we start to develop the land. So that is a quite sustainable model. Bear in mind that Hong Kong is a very, very congested city, and the demand on housing is humongous. So that's how we run the model, that TOD to fulfill multiple objectives, funding issues, create community, create new experience, and that's what we're trying to achieve. And we're also looking into possibility of doing something similar outside of Hong Kong.
Thanks for that, David. And we'll get into that a little bit further as we go through some of our questions. But Josh, both models obviously have a very critical role for the development industry and companies like Cadillac Fairview. So what would you like to stress in terms of your role and what you think of transit-oriented communities?
Thanks, Mary Ellen. So at Cadillac Fairview, we very much value the importance of transit. Just to give a little background on Cadillac Fairview for those who are unfamiliar, we're the real estate arm for Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. We're one of the largest real estate owners in Canada, with about $35 billion in assets. Our vision is, being leaders in creating and cultivating places and experiences. And to do this in the sites that we currently own and to develop them is extremely important that we have that component to it. I think our biggest one right now that we have underway is East Harbour, but there's a number of them across Toronto that we're looking at our regional shopping centers. And transit can be in all sorts of functions. It can be busing, it can be light rail transit, it can be Metrolinx type GO trains, and it can be TTC. Our focus is building around those areas that have transit in place or have the potential for transit down the road. And that's where I think East Harbour is a really exciting project for us. It's a 38-acre site. It's nestled between Leslieville and West Donlands. It's adjacent to the Portlands, where there's a tremendous amount of investment currently underway. And and our idea there is to really rejuvenate it, revitalize it, renew it with the introduction of a major office component. It's roughly 10 million square feet of office, and we look at building a complete community. And hopefully we'll add some residential there as well to really make the community feel work. I think it's important too, from a financial perspective, working at Cadillac Fairview, it's our fiduciary responsibility to manage teachers' pensions appropriately, right? So this is where private and public come together, I think, and hopefully with the same viewpoint that it's our responsibility to make sure that there's a return to their investment. This isn't a charity. We have to manage their money very carefully, and we have to generate returns to do that. When we talk about large-scale projects like East Harbour, they're quite expensive, and there's a lot of capital required. So that's a benefit of working for a large company with the funds available, but there's also that responsibility from a financial perspective.
Thanks for those comments, David. Looking at some of our questions, we've already talked a little bit about some of the differences between the Toronto model and the Hong Kong model. Michael, are there any comments that I'm positive you've studied the Hong Kong model when you were setting up the Toronto one? In terms of difference in scales or objectives, are there any differences that were important when you were setting up the Toronto model?
Yeah, we indeed. We looked at Hong Kong. We looked at London as well. We looked at New York. I mean, as I say, there are many world-class cities that are intentionally using investment in transit to create the kinds of cohesive communities that each one of us in our way has been talking about. David, my friend, it's delightful to see you. I'm not sure if you're on the screen with me. Not sure if you're on the screen with me at the same time, so people won't be able to see your reaction when I characterize these differences. Look, two of them that I would cite. The first of which is relative density. David did a great point, a job at pointing at this. I think the task in Hong Kong, given the geographic constraints of the area, given the size of the population, was really about maximizing some of the density that was possible over top of transit stations, to create a network that was as intentionally designed as it could be to eliminate traffic congestion. And as I was pointing out before, we begin from the premise that, more density is good along transit lines. It has a whole bunch of productive benefits, but that it has to be effectively reasonable for the jurisdiction in which we live, which is Toronto, and for the communities in which we hope to catalyze these particular developments. So, as I say, we've begun with a different assumption about sort of what the underlying density would be for any individual transit-oriented community that we're building. So that's one difference that I would point at. The other one, and David brought it up, I think is the policy framework. Hong Kong has been at this for some time, a little bit more mature in respect to that policy framework, and dare I say perhaps some differences in respect of nature of approach to advancing capital projects in Hong Kong versus Canada. What the government has done, what we have observed them to do, and we're thankful, is pass legislative instruments like the Building Transit Faster Act and the Transit-Oriented Communities Act, really to try, with a bundle of things that we know, to hold up and delay these sorts of developments, whether transit projects or the communities that go with them, to give more predictability to everybody about the successful realization of these communities. And here I would just once again have to compliment our municipal partners who are working with us quite actively to try to streamline, to the best of our collective ability, some of the processes of review for these transit-oriented communities, and to expedite some of the conversation, which is incredibly important, about how local planning expertise bears upon even the concepts that we begin from. So, Mary Ellen, those would be the two things that I would highlight.
Thank you. And David, is there anything that you would like to add in terms of the process or issues in Hong Kong?
Yeah, I mean, very, very good to, the same stage, on the same screen, with Michael. and when I've been able to, when I used to travel to Toronto, we have quite some exchange on the two different models. I think one commonality is that no matter what model that you use, and you require to have someone or an agent or a government, a department of some sort to masterminding, the overall planning. I think that's the key. I mean, doing TOD, it could be very, very fragmented. I mean, how to gel everything together is more than art. In our case, we very emphasize a kind of central planning, a master planning of the land use, land zoning, and also the appropriate gross floor area for different activities within a DOT project. And another very important element is the private participation. And we're talking about land use, we're talking about building. From MTR perspective, we're never the builder, but once we master plan, we put out a package into the market. We welcome maximum market participation and get the best design, get the best harmonization that we could leverage on the private innovation and creativity within all those frameworks of the TOD elements.
So that's a good point in terms of the impact on private development. When we look at best practices and the people who are involved in the process, we look at and Michael's talked about the community involvement, about the municipal involvement. In terms of the industry involvement, Josh, are there any comments you would like to add to that?
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, it's a bit of a three-legged. I don't want to use the word three-legged monster, but we have government on the provincial side, we have government on the city side, and we have private development, and we all have to figure this out together. We all have different things that are important, and we found the TOC process to be quite good. It's a definitive timeline. You're engaging the community. There's multiple outreaches. You're getting a short and compressed schedule. I mean, one of the biggest challenges on these large scale redevelopments is just time, and it takes a lot of time to get these things through. And maybe that time doesn't really have a benefit to it. Just because it's taking longer doesn't mean the end result is necessarily better. So we like, that there's a more compressed known timeline. There's quicker turnaround. And then I think with just that compression, you get to the middle ground a lot quicker. You basically, you're not positioning yourself on the 1 yard line and the 99-yard line. You're positioning yourself as close to the 50, and you're working your way towards a compromise. And I think that's really helped get our heads wrapped around some of these processes and procedures that would normally take a lot longer. So for us, we really like it. It's not perfect, but it's much better, I think, than a lot of other type of approvals that we would go otherwise. So, and we just like I would say the assembly and the collaboration that we get from all parties. I think you're going to see quicker results. And when we're dealing with the housing crisis, it's we have a huge supply issue, and the longer it takes for us to unravel these things, the further that's going to get exacerbated over time. So we like the idea of getting these projects underground and start getting things built more quickly.
I can say my whole career has been involved until recently on the municipal side, and the whole issue of time has always been a consideration, time in the development process. And the one thing I've seen that seems to be working quite well with the transit-oriented community process is the time can be compressed, but the community participation is still at the forefront and still a major part of it. And the city development is there any magic to this that could be that makes it different for transit-oriented community projects versus others?
Well, Mary Ellen, maybe I can jump in there. I would note at least two things. The first of which was the agreement almost a couple of years ago now of memorandums of understanding as between Ontario and the City of Toronto, as well as York Region, about the objects of transit-oriented communities, the things both levels of government were trying to catalyze, the high-level process that ultimately was going to be used, and that was so closely related to what has now been a successful tripartite funding agreement for these self-same projects, really had a ton of benefit of just getting us off on the right foot. And then here, I just shout out to my colleagues, Chris Murray and Bruce McGregor, wheresoever they are. A lot of credit to the municipalities, right, who have met us in flight in many places and spaces with our plans and have worked with us to think about, to Josh's point, how we would expedite some of the reviews without sacrificing the indispensable voice of local communities in connection to these developments. Those two things in particular, I think, really have been a huge driver of our success to date, and we hope to build on it moving forward. Great.
We've got a number of questions from our audience, so I'd like to go over some of those. One of them is, has the COVID impacted transit-oriented development in any way, and positive or negative? It certainly impacted ridership to the downtown, and maybe where you put office versus residential, I'm not sure. But if I'd appreciate everybody's comments on that one.
Well, maybe, Mary Ellen, what I can do is I'll do the transit side of it, and then Josh, perhaps from your vantage point in the private sector, just you think of these investments, that's the right way to go. No doubt, obviously, that the ingress and egress of people from downtown Toronto has been temporarily paused. I think it's safe to say that whatever paradigm we find ourselves living in moving forward, we're going to return to more normal levels of ridership. And the way that I've heard my friend Phil Verster talk about this is that this region in particular was already a generation behind keeping up with demand. So I'm not sure that the premise that ridership to downtown, or indeed ridership from downtown to outlying communities is impaired is an accurate one. And certainly we've not slowed down at all in respect of thinking about the indispensability of getting these transit projects built. I would say that we talk very closely with the market about what sort of appetite might be for various forms of development. And there, Josh, perhaps I'll hand to you just to hum a bar from the industry's perspective.
Yeah, so I just I'm in the middle of a project out in Vancouver. It's on transit, and we've noticed a significant increase in demand for that product type, and it's the same here. There's in uncertain times, there's always a flight to quality, and having that infrastructure in place is a really key component to making it viable for the long haul. I think people's investors can be investors in your own homes. It can be investors if you're in your business because you want to have your office there. They see the benefit of having that transit there for the long haul. And I don't think, that probably is more exacerbated with COVID, that there's a flight for quality. So for us, it's always been a key component. We think it's one that sets our real estate apart from maybe our competitors, having that right on, having our sites right on transit, and it's where we're really keying our investments moving forward. We think that there's a substantial opportunity at a lot of our sites. East Harbor is an easy one because it's a site that's just well positioned. But again, back to our shopping center lands where we have the opportunity and ability to add more density to, these sites is equally as important. So. For us, it's a home run recipe. I think that we're going to be very excited to continue to invest in the future.
The next question we have is, how is the overbuild financed, and will developers benefiting from transit overbuild pay for the delta in costs? Josh, is that one you want to start with? Or Michael?
Well, it's an important one. I mean, you got to build for the future. And there needs to be investment from the private community to help build the infrastructure required, but it needs to be, it needs to be collaborated with all the different agencies. I mean, we look at East Harbor, for example. It's just the construction of it is going to add, 4,000 to 5,000 construction jobs. It's going to, once it's fully built out, it could be up to $170 million of annual taxes. You can talk about the 50,000 people that will work there. And they'll spend money there, and they'll spend their time there. So we really look at economic growth. There's a significant community investment component to it of $62 million, and all these have been factored into the overall project. So yeah, we do look at it as something that has to have an economic return. Otherwise, we can't build it. East Harbor was zoned for 10 million square feet of office. We think to build a complete community, you need to have residential there. I think most would agree with that. We really want to build a 24/7 place. We've experienced that, or we believe that the days of having a 9-to-5 office environment are no longer there, and especially with COVID. We think that you really need to kind of live, work, play in the same area, and all those things need to be taken into consideration when building these places. But if you can make the economics work, which we certainly hope we can, there's going to be a significant community benefit to it. And we've enjoyed the open houses. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback in the 3 open houses that we've held on, the things that we're looking to add: arts and culture, public spaces, neighborhood identity, affordability, all these things that are so key and important. We think that there's a great opportunity here. So for us, we think we can make it work, but it has to be like a little bit of give and take. There has to be some recognition that, we do have to produce a return to make the investment happen. I mean, we can't get bank financing if we don't have a return. And we can't get our pensioners to support it if we can't generate a return. So there's that balance that will always have to be in consideration.
Yeah, it's well said. And perhaps to that, I would add 3 things. The first of which is a major mitigation of risk in this process is that multiple levels of government have agreed to fund transit infrastructure that is sufficiently hardened in its specifications to allow for the overbuild, right? So the fact that that's already done up front is really important. At the end of the day, because, and I'm sure David would bear me out on this. Yeah. Second thing that I would say is, and Josh himself put it quite well, absolutely, there will be commercial conversations with our counterparties about the value of acceleration, the value of planning certainty, and what that means in respect of contributions by developers to community infrastructure and amenities, et cetera. As well as to the cost of underlying transit infrastructure. I think that's a conversation we'll definitely have. The third thing I'd say is it's just important to know nothing about our approach to TOC in any way, predates or is predatory of the development charge regimes that City of Toronto or York Region ultimately have in place, which is the other mechanism, right, to enable infrastructure upgrades to be made to cater to these sorts of developments. So those three things I think are important.
Yeah. David, like your comments on how that's worked in Hong Kong.
Yeah, as I said, you need a very, very careful planning up front. I mean, that is crucial. One of the challenges of the TOD, okay, in our case, is that, okay, amongst our many objectives, definitely one is to fill the funding gaps, okay? And then we may able to evaluate the land premium, the land price very much upfront, but the development pace could be very different. Because as I said, in Hong Kong, we are a very highly dense city. We build high-rising, high-density condos. Okay, talking about one TOD, easily talking about more than 1,000 condo units, and as you got to be upfront planning very carefully to develop in several phases. You don't want to push everything out to the private market and flood the market and get very low price, and also get the developers get burned and not able to make money. But at the same time, you want to maintain the right momentum because your railway construction costs payment to some extent depend on that streams. So we are in a kind of dilemma that whether DOT come first or railway come first. In Hong Kong, it's always railway come first, because without the railway, no builder or no developer really want to go out to that out of the way district to try to build something new, while they reckon that probably no one will be going to move out there and buy their properties. So building the railway is a strong signal that a remote part of the district will become flourish, and people will look into it. Despite in Hong Kong, our demand for property is always strong. Under the pandemic, every year, roughly in Hong Kong as a whole, we're talking about building 220,000 condo units. Okay, from the market perspective, it's always sold out. Even under the pandemic, we thought that the pandemic would have an impact to the property market. Ended up not the case. So careful planning on the cash flows, I think that is a key to our TOD.
And you raise a good point, David, about dealing with TOD when you're outside of the dense urban core, that nobody wants to go there without the railway. Do you see a place in Ontario, Michael, for transit-oriented communities outside of Toronto and York Region where the population levels are so high?
Yes, conceivably so. Absolutely. And some of those discussions, I think, based around the lessons that we're learning from TOC on subways are being discussed with partners in Waterloo and Ottawa and a variety of different places. But look, even more broadly, to Josh's point earlier, as the agency responsible for even surplus lands that the province is ultimately bringing forward for disposition, the notion of having a different gear of working with partners to ultimately try to expedite the catalyzing of intentionally constructed developments that have a resonant social impact is something that we want to do, whether associated with transit stations or not. So it's both for us, Mary Ellen. It's about where it might be that we will apply TOC elsewhere, but it's also about educating ourselves vis-a-vis how to partner with developers and municipalities in order to do other things. One example being, we at IO have just brought 3 properties forward, surplus properties to use to catalyze the creation of long-term care homes at those sites. And many of the lessons that we learned about how to appropriately involve the municipality in that disposition process have been ported directly over from TOC. So I think its effect is in both those ways.
That's a great point, using it outside of the transit area. Josh, you develop right across Canada. So you've mentioned Vancouver and Toronto. Do you see being involved in projects like TOCs and in other places where it's not quite as dense?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at it in Hamilton. We have light rail transit in Kitchener. Been working with Calgary on elements of the Green Line extension. Whether it's SkyTrain in Vancouver or it's TTC here in all forms. Again, we deal with busing is just as critical as rail and light rail or even heavy rail. So no, it's continual focus across our portfolio at all of our other shopping centers to make it its highest and best use, and we think that there's a recipe there for success in the future and further investment. And from a socially, environmentally conscious company, we think it just checks all the boxes. It's just taking advantage of what's already there.
So we've only got a couple of minutes left. So to wrap up, I'd like to give everyone a minute or so, just if there are any final comments that haven't come out through the questions or presentations that you'd like to make. Do we want to start with you, Michael? We'll follow the same order we did at the beginning.
Thank you, Mary Ellen, for being an effective MC of this session. Thanks everybody for joining. Josh, David, always a pleasure. I just want to stress how lucky we are as an organization. We literally get to build the connective tissue of society, and to get to do that not only in respect of these transit projects, but to think about how, as Josh rightly puts it, we create walkable, accessible, appropriate development along what we think are going to be state-of-the-art transit lines. It's an excellent thing to spend the day doing, right? And perhaps the last thing that I will say is, I want to stress again our commitment to work with municipal partners and local communities. I'm with Josh. I've deeply appreciated all of the open houses that we've been to and the feedback that we've been receiving. So look for more of that. And again, anybody who's interested, engageio.ca is the page to go to get more information.
Thank you. And using the model in other sectors, I think is a great move forward. So maybe a topic for next year. David, do you have any parting comments or help for us?
Yeah, thank you, Mary Ellen. And leverage on our experience tells that to make a TOD work and good and successful, you need to have a very experienced architect. An architect being the centerpiece of this exercise to gel the different government agency, private sector, and more importantly, what does a TOD at the end of the day is to connectivity with the railway in order to create a 1+1 more equal to 2+, if not 3+ type of the impact that benefits all, and then we have to keep that in mind. That is a very, very important in the outset of any TOD planning.
Thanks. And Josh?
Yeah, I think, the one thing that I've learned over the years with these complicated projects is it's really important to get alignment. And I think setting a vision for the specific site, making sure that, in this case, the province, the city, the developer are aligned in what the vision is. And I think having that alignment, because there's mutual benefit for all parties involved, really make these things successful. And if you keep that lens in place, I think it makes the whole execution a lot easier. That this is what we're trying to do, and it's a benefit for all. You're always going to have, some areas where you're going to have to compromise a little bit for all parties to make these things work. They're really complicated. They're really costly. They take a long time. Even if they're expedited, they still take a long time. And so having that alignment is really important for us to make these things like executable, right? And that's the one thing I do appreciate in Ontario. We have a really good government managing with the city and alignment there, I think, on what the ultimate vision is going to be.
Thank you. Well, our time is up. We have 30 seconds left. So I appreciate everybody's insightful comments. It's been wonderful preparing for this seminar with you, Michael, David, and Josh. I've learned a lot, and I think our audience has learned a lot today. So thank you very much for your comments and your feedback, and appreciate your input. Until next year, hopefully, we'll all be together again next year talking about another one.
Till then, stay
well.
well.
Thank you very much, Mary Ellen.
Yeah,
thank you, Michael. Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.